The scent of champagne and lies hit me the moment I stepped into my glass mansion. Julian stood entirely too close to Serafina, her hand claiming his chest. The whispers died instantly when the guests saw me. Before I could react, Mom dragged me into the kitchen and slammed a thick file onto the counter. "They are not just sleeping together," she said. "They are making you the scapegoat for the biggest financial collapse in state history." My name is Alara Vance, although for the last 3 years, I have felt more like a ghost haunting the edges of my own life than a living woman. I steered my battered sedan up the winding driveway of the Viridia Bay estate, the engine groaning in protest. I had just spent 3 weeks in the scorched deserts of Nevada supervising a structural retrofit for a client who cared more about cutting costs than safety, and the grime of the job still clung to my skin. I wanted nothing more than a hot shower and silence. Instead, I found a parking lot full of aggressive wealth blocking my path to the garage. Sleek foreign convertibles and limousines cluttered the stone pavers. My stomach tightened with a familiar dread. Julian had thrown another party. He called them networking events, but they were really just shrines to his own vanity, erected without consulting me. I parked my dusty car behind a gleaming silver Porsche, the contrast looking like a deliberate insult, and grabbed my bag. I unlocked the front door, and the assault on my senses was immediate. The air inside was thick, choking on the scent of heavy tuberose perfume mixed with the metallic tang of expensive champagne. The house was vibrating with the hum of 100 conversations, but the moment I stepped into the foyer, the noise died. It did not fade gradually. It was severed. The silence rippled outward from the door like a shockwave until the entire great room was devoid of sound. I stood there in my work boots and stained jeans, feeling the weight of their eyes. Then I saw him. Julian stood in the center of the room, near the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the black ocean. He was holding a crystal flute, his smile bright and practiced. Standing impossibly close to him was Serafina Cross. The press called her the Black Widow of real estate, a woman who devoured companies and CEOs with equal appetite. She was wearing a dress the color of oxblood wine. It was a shade of red she knew I detested, a shade that looked like a fresh wound. Her hand was not at her side. It was resting flat against the lapel of Julian's tuxedo, her fingers curling slightly into the fabric as if she owned the suit and the man inside it. She leaned in, her lips grazing his ear, and whispered something that made him laugh softly. It was an intimacy that violated every professional boundary in existence. I forced my lips into a rigid social smile and took a step forward. The crowd parted, but not out of respect. I saw the looks exchanged over rims of glasses. Pity, amusement, malice. "Does she know a woman in emerald silk whispered loudly enough for me to hear? She has to be blind not to," her companion muttered back, trailing off as I passed. I ignored them, locking my eyes on my husband. I was ready to play the part of the gracious, oblivious wife one last time tonight. I prepared to greet them, but before I could take another step, a hand clamped around my upper arm. The grip was bony but hard as steel. I looked down to see my mother, Martha. She looked out of place in this room of peacocks, wearing her severe gray wool cardigan and sensible shoes. Usually, she blended into the background, a silent observer that Julian liked to ignore. Tonight, her eyes were burning with a terrifying, cold fury. "Come with me," she commanded. It was not a request. She did not wait for an answer. She dragged me through the crowd, ignoring the startled gasps of the guests we bumped into. She hauled me toward the service entrance, her grip never loosening until we burst into the kitchen. The kitchen was soundproof, designed to keep the noise of catering staff away from the residents. As the heavy door sealed shut behind us, the silence became absolute. The air here was colder, smelling of stainless steel and lemon sanitizer. Mom released my arm and turned to face me. Her face was pale, stripped of all blood. "We need to talk," she said. Her voice was low, lacking its usual calm cadence. It carried a deadly urgency that sent a shiver down my spine, colder than the Nevada night. I opened my mouth to ask what was wrong, perhaps to complain about Julian's rudeness, but she cut me off by slamming a thick manila folder onto the marble island. A sheaf of photographs slid out, followed by a crumpled bank statement. The photos were blurry, taken from a distance, but the subjects were unmistakable. Julian and Serafina entering a hotel. Julian signing documents in a dimly lit car. They are not just sleeping together. Ilara, Mom said, her finger jabbing at the paper where numbers in the millions were highlighted in angry yellow marker. Look at the dates. Look at the transfers. They are emptying the accounts. They are setting you up as the fall guy for the biggest financial collapse this state has ever seen. I stared at the crumpled bank statement, but I was not seeing the numbers. I was seeing a girl from the Rust Belt who thought hard work was the only currency that mattered. I grew up in a town where the steel mills had rusted shut, leaving the sky gray and the people grayer. I worked 3 jobs to pay for my architecture degree. I smelled like diner grease and cheap cleaning supplies for 4 years so that I could eventually smell like drafting paper and fresh graphite. I believed the lie that talent and grit were enough to build a kingdom. Julian saw that grit. We met at a design conference 7 years ago. He did not look at me the way other men did. He did not look at my legs or my face. He looked at my sketches with a hunger that I mistook for passion. I was the structural genius, the one who understood how to make glass and steel dance without falling. Julian was the salesman. He had a jawline carved from granite and a smile that could sell sand to a nomad in the desert. He told me we would be partners. He told me we would build the future. We started Thorne and Vance. It was printed in gold leaf on our first office door, but year by year, the ampersand got smaller. Then my name began to fade. Julian told me it was just about branding. Shorter is punchier, honey, he had said, kissing my forehead. Thorne Group just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? Everyone knows you are the brains. You don't need your name on the door to own the room. I believed him. I let him erase me from the billboards because I thought we were writing a life together in permanent ink. Then, 2 years ago, Serafina Cross walked into our boardroom. She came as an angel investor for the Zenith Tower project, our magnum opus. But she did not bring salvation. She brought a scalpel. Slowly, she began to carve away the soul of my design. She called it value engineering. I called it dangerous. She replaced my reinforced steel specs with cheaper imports. She swapped the fire-resistant cladding for a synthetic alternative that saved the company $2 million. Whenever I protested, Julian would silence me. "You are being too rigid, Ilara," he would say, his eyes cold and distant. "Serafina knows the market. We need to be agile." He stopped coming home for dinner. He started having late meetings with the board, which I later learned consisted only of him and her. He went on business trips to scout locations, leaving me behind to manage the technical fallout of their budget cuts. I told myself it was a sacrifice. I told myself I was the supportive wife, the anchor that held the ship steady while he navigated the storm. I was a fool. In the cold light of the kitchen, the truth hit me harder than a wrecking ball. Mom tapped her finger aggressively against a paragraph of fine print on the incorporation documents for the shell companies. "Read it," Mom hissed, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "Read what position they gave you." I squinted at the text, my breath hitched in my throat. "Sole legal liability director," I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. That means when the Zenith Tower fails, or when the IRS comes looking for the missing $40 million, Julian walks away clean. Mom said, her eyes watering. "He is the CEO of the parent company, but you are the legally designated scapegoat for the operational entities. They didn't just cheat on you. Ilara, they built a cage, put you inside it, and threw away the key 5 years ago." I looked at the door leading back to the party. I could hear the muffled thump of bass from the sound system. Julian was out there, drinking vintage champagne, celebrating the fact that he had successfully sold his wife down the river. He had not married me for love. He had married an insurance policy. I was never his partner. I was livestock, fattened up and kept ignorant, waiting for the slaughter. I thought he loved me, I stammered, feeling the tears prick my eyes. But they were hot, angry tears. He loves money, Mom corrected me, grabbing my shoulders. And he loves not going to prison. You are his get-out-of-jail-free card. So, are you going to let him play it? We slipped out the back door of the estate like thieves in the night, leaving the sound of applause and clinking glasses behind us. Julian and Serafina were likely toasting to their brilliance, secure in the belief that I was upstairs crying in a bathroom or fixing my makeup. I drove my beat-up sedan with white-knuckled precision, following Mom's taillights through the city until we reached her small apartment in the older district of Viridia Bay. I expected the smell of lavender and old books that usually filled her home. Instead, I walked into a war room. Her living room furniture had been pushed against the walls to make space for 3 large corkboards standing on easels. They were covered in maps, printouts, and red string connecting names to offshore accounts. It looked like the lair of a conspiracy theorist. But as I stepped closer, I realized it was a map of my own destruction. "Sit down," Mom ordered, pointing to the dining table which was buried under stacks of paper. "Use your eyes, Ilara. You know how to spot a structural flaw in a skyscraper. Look at the company structure." I took a deep breath and pulled the documents toward me. I forced my brain to switch gears. I stopped looking at this as a betrayal and started looking at it as a blueprint. I traced the flow of capital through the Thorn Group subsidiaries. It was an intricate, chaotic mess, but the pattern emerged quickly. "It is a funnel," I muttered, my finger tracing a line from the investor accounts to a shell corporation called Blue Tide Holdings. Money comes in from the investors for the Zenith Tower, sits in the account for 48 hours, and then is paid out as consulting fees to these entities in the Cayman Islands. There is no actual construction capital. They are paying old investors with new money. "A Ponzi scheme," Mom said, handing me a mug of black coffee. "A classic one. But that is not the worst part. Look at the material procurement logs." I flipped to the section she indicated. My blood ran cold. The specifications called for high-grade, seismic-resistant steel and reinforced concrete capable of withstanding the coastal winds. The invoices, however, showed purchases from a supplier I had never heard of, for materials that were fractionally cheaper and significantly weaker. "Grade B steel," I whispered, horror rising in my throat. They swapped the core pillars for grade B steel. If a storm hits, the Zenith won't just sway, it will snap. Then I saw the bottom of the invoice. There, in crisp digital ink, was my signature. Ilara Vance, Chief Technical Officer. "I never signed this," I said, my voice rising. "I rejected this supplier 3 months ago." "They used your digital key," Mom replied grimly. "They bypassed the 2-factor authentication. I spoke to the source who gave me these. He is an old accountant named Mr. Henderson. Serafina fired him when he asked too many questions about the Caymans. He is hiding in a motel 2 towns over because he thinks he is being followed." She reached into the pile and pulled out a single printed email. It was encrypted, but Mr. Henderson had evidently deciphered it. It was from Julian to Serafina, dated 6 months ago. Subject: the firewall. Content: "Don't worry about the audit. Ilara is the firewall. If the heat gets too high, she burns so we stay cool. The legal framework is airtight around her neck." "The firewall," I repeated the words, feeling them brand themselves onto my heart. He calls his wife a firewall. I stared at the paper until the words blurred. For 5 years, I had poured my soul into his dreams. I had worked 18-hour days. I had sacrificed my own name, and to him, I was just flammable material. The tears I had been holding back evaporated. In their place, A cold, hard clarity settled over me. They thought they were so clever. They thought they had covered every angle. But in their arrogance, they had forgotten who actually designed the building. They missed something, I said, looking up at Mom. My voice was steady now, devoid of the trembling fear I had felt an hour ago. What? Mom asked. I have the original geological surveys and the raw CAD files on my private server, I explained, tapping the table. I know exactly where the bedrock is unstable, and I know that with the cheap materials they used, the load-bearing capacity is compromised by at least 40%, but to prove it in court, I can't just show simulations. I need a physical sample. Ilara, you can't go back there, Mom said, alarmed. They will destroy you if they know you know. I stood up and grabbed my car keys. I am not running. Mom, I said, a dark smile touching my lips. I am going back to the tiger's den. I need to get into the site and drill a core sample of that concrete before they pour the final slab next week. If I run now, I look guilty. If I stay, I can bury them under their own tower. I walked into the Thorn Group headquarters the next morning wearing my best armor, a tailored cream suit that cost more than my first car, and a smile that could cut glass. I had spent 2 hours in front of the mirror, painting over the dark circles under my eyes and practicing the vacant, happy expression of a trophy wife. Julian was standing by the reception desk, his hand hovering over his phone. When he saw me, he froze. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost, or worse, a liability he thought he had already neutralized. Ilara, he stammered, blinking rapidly. I didn't expect to see you today. You left so abruptly last night. Are you all right? I walked up to him and straightened his tie, letting my fingers linger on the silk. Oh, Julian, I am so sorry, I said, my voice dripping with synthetic sweetness. The champagne went straight to my head. I had a terrible migraine and Mom insisted on taking me home to sleep it off. Did I miss anything important? Julian searched my face, looking for any crack in the facade. Finding none, his shoulders relaxed, and the arrogant smirk returned. Just boring business talk. Darling, he said, kissing my cheek. You know how it is. Of course, I replied. I am just here to finish up the maintenance protocols for the Zenith opening. I want everything to be perfect for your big day. The elevator doors pinged open, and Serafina stepped out. She stopped when she saw us, her eyes narrowing instantly. She was wearing a sharp black suit, looking every inch the predator. Ilara, she said, her voice smooth but cold as ice. Back so soon I thought you might be indisposed. I am feeling wonderful. Thank you, I said, stepping into the elevator with them. The doors closed, trapping us in a box of silence. Serafina looked me up and down. That shade of cream is very brave, she murmured, her eyes flicking to my waist. It really shows everything. And that black suit is timeless. I countered, smiling pleasantly. It is perfect for mourning. Mourning, she asked, arching a brow. Mourning the end of the project. I lied effortlessly. It has been such a long journey. Speaking of which, I need administrative access to the main server today. I need to update the HVAC maintenance logs before the inspection. Julian frowned. I don't think that is necessary. The IT team can handle it. Oh, let her do it. Julian, Serafina interrupted, dismissing me with a wave of her hand. It is just air conditioning logs. If it makes her feel useful, why not? She thought I was too stupid to understand the financial files, so she assumed I was harmless. That was her mistake. 10 minutes later, I was in the server room. The air was frigid and hummed with the sound of cooling fans. I did not touch the financial folders. Instead, I accessed the building management system. I wasn't looking for money. I was looking for control. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I uploaded a backdoor program I had written overnight. It would give me remote override capability for every electronic system in the Zenith Tower, from the lights to the security doors. While the code compiled, I snooped through Julian's personal travel folder. There they were. 2 one-way tickets to Monaco, departing 3 hours after the ribbon-cutting ceremony. They were not planning to stick around for the fallout. I left the server room and walked past Julian's executive assistant, a young woman named Sarah who always looked nervous. "Mrs. Thorne," she whispered, looking around to make sure the coast was clear. I shouldn't tell you this, but Julian asked me to liquidate the joint art collection. He said it was for a portfolio restructuring, but he wanted the wire transfers sent to a new account. "Thank you." "Sarah," I said softly. "He is just moving things around for tax purposes. Don't worry." I walked into Julian's office. He was texting furiously, a smile on his face that I knew was reserved for Serafina. "Honey," I said, placing a stack of papers on his desk. "I need you to sign these. It is just the authorization for the additional safety inspection I ordered. Standard procedure." He didn't even look up from his phone. "Can't it wait? It is just a formality." I pressed, "Unless you want to read the entire 40-page compliance manual." He sighed, grabbed his pen, and scribbled his signature on the bottom line. "Fine. There. Happy deliriously," I said, taking the paper back. He had just signed a document that contained a buried clause stating he had been fully informed of all structural deficiencies and had chosen to proceed against the advice of his chief architect. He had just signed his own confession. As I walked out of the building, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Mom. They just contacted a divorce lawyer specializing in incapacitation cases. "You have 48 hours before they file papers to have you committed." I got into my car and checked the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't smiling anymore. The game was on. The wind off the bay did not just blow, it screamed. It tore through the skeletal steel framework of the unfinished upper floors, creating a low, moaning whistle that sounded like the building itself was crying out in pain. I pulled the collar of my stolen maintenance jumpsuit up around my neck and adjusted the hard hat low over my eyes. Tonight, I was not Ilara Vance, the architect. I was a ghost in the machine I had helped design. I slipped through a gap in the perimeter fence that I knew existed only because I had marked it for repair 2 weeks ago. The construction site was a graveyard of shadows and towering cranes. I made my way down to the sub-basement, the heart of the beast. This was where the massive load-bearing columns held up the 50-story ambition of my husband and his mistress. The air down here was stagnant and smelled of wet dust. I pulled a handheld ultrasonic scanner from my tool belt. My hands were steady, but my stomach was churning with acid. I pressed the sensor against the primary column, the one that anchored the entire south face of the tower. I watched the digital wave form on the screen. It should have been a solid, dense line. Instead, it was jagged and full of holes. 40%, I whispered, the words choking me. It is missing 40% of the necessary density. I moved to the sensor box bolted to the side of the pillar. The LED light was a calm, reassuring green, indicating structural integrity was 100%. I used a screwdriver to pop the casing. Inside, a crude jumper wire had been soldered across the circuit board, bypassing the actual sensor input. It was hardwired to lie. They had silenced the building's alarm system so no one would hear it screaming before it collapsed. Suddenly, the heavy thud of boots echoed off the concrete walls. Flashlights cut through the darkness like frantic lightsabers. "Check the south quadrant," a rough voice barked. I saw a light. It was Serafina's private security detail. They were not supposed to be here on a Tuesday night. I looked around frantically. There was nowhere to run. The only hiding place was the service elevator shaft, the doors of which were propped open for maintenance. I squeezed through the gap and pulled the doors shut just as the beams of light swept across the spot where I had been standing. I balanced on a greasy steel beam in the pitch black, the smell of hydraulic oil and old dust filling my nose. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I was terrified they would hear it. 2 guards stopped right on the other side of the thin metal doors. "I don't like this, boss," one man grumbled. "This place gives me the creeps." "Shut up and do your job," the second voice replied. It was the chief of security. I recognized his rasp. "We just need to keep it locked down until the opening. After that, well, accidents happen." "You mean the architect?" "Yeah." The chief chuckled darkly. "She has been unstable lately. A fall from the penthouse terrace. Tragic. Too much champagne. Maybe. Just make sure the cameras are offline for 10 minutes. I clamped my hand over my mouth to stop the scream rising in my throat. They were not just planning to ruin me, they were planning to kill me. I waited in the dark for 20 minutes after their footsteps faded. My legs were cramping, and I was covered in grime. Before I climbed out, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a micro recorder. I reached up and stuck it magnetically to the underside of the elevator control panel mesh. If they talked about murder in this basement again, I would hear it. I grabbed a fist-sized chunk of concrete that had crumbled off the defective pillar physical, undeniable proof of their negligence, and shoved it into my pocket. I scrambled out of the shaft and ran. I drove to Mom's house like a woman possessed. The chunk of concrete sat on the passenger seat, staring at me. It was not just a rock, it was a weapon. When I burst into Mom's apartment, I was shaking, covered in grease, and clutching the stone. Ilara, Mom gasped, dropping her book. I slammed the concrete onto the table. It cracked loudly. "They are going to kill me." "Mom," I said, my voice trembling with adrenaline. "They rigged the sensors. The building is a death trap, and on opening day, they plan to throw me off the roof." Mom's face went hard. She looked at the concrete, then at me. She went to her desk and pulled out a fresh legal pad. "Then we don't just expose them," she said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "We execute the domino effect. We knock down one piece, and we watch their entire world smash into the ground." The piece of concrete I had stolen from the site sat on a stainless steel table in Marcus's private lab. Marcus was an old friend from university, a structural engineer who valued integrity over paychecks. He adjusted his spectacles and looked up from the microscope, his face pale. "It is worse than you thought." "Ilara," Marcus said, his voice grim. "The aggregate mix is all wrong. It is porous. If the wind load hits, let's say 70 miles per hour, the shear stress will snap those columns like dry twigs. I will write the report, but you need to know that once I sign this, my career is on the line too. If we don't do this, people die. Marcus." I replied, "I need that report by tomorrow morning." While I secured the technical evidence, Mom was weaving the legal net. She sat in her kitchen, surrounded by burner phones. She had reached out to an old contact at the FBI, a specialist in white-collar crime who had been chasing Serafina's shadow for a decade. Mom was feeding them information drop by drop, just enough to get them interested, but holding back the location in the primary target until the timing was perfect. "I am not giving you the full file yet," I heard Mom say into the phone, her voice hard. "You get the rest when you have a warrant in hand for the Zenith opening. Yes. I promise it will be worth the wait." Back at the office, I played the part of the diligent employee. I sat at my workstation and crafted 2 presentation decks for the opening ceremony. The first was a glossy, hollow collection of buzzwords and rendered sunsets, exactly what Julian wanted. The second was a lethal weapon. It contained the real structural data, the forged invoices, and the emails I had intercepted. I programmed a hidden trigger in the presentation software. If I pressed the space bar, it played Julian's version. If I pressed a specific sequence of keys, it unleashed the truth. At noon, Serafina cornered me. She invited me to lunch at a bistro that served salads costing $40. She smiled as she poured me sparkling water, but her eyes were scanning my face for weakness. "Ilara, Sweetie, we are worried about you, Serafina said, placing a manicured hand over mine. Julian told me about your episodes, the paranoia, the exhaustion. We think it might be best if you took a step back, maybe signed the divorce papers now, quietly. For your mental health, I knew this was the test. If I fought back, she would know I was up to something. So, I let my shoulders slump. I forced tears into my eyes and let my hand tremble as I picked up the glass. I think you are right, I stammered, looking down at the table. I am so tired. Serafina, I just want it to be over. I will sign whatever you want. Just let me get through the ceremony tomorrow. I want to leave with some dignity. Serafina's smile widened, triumphant and cruel. Of course. Darling, that is all we want too. Dignity. She bought it. They both did. They thought the wolf was a sheep. While they spent the afternoon celebrating their victory, I was quietly moving the chess pieces. I accessed my grandmother's trust fund and my personal savings, transferring every cent into an irrevocable trust based in Switzerland. Then, I went to the wall safe in our master bedroom. I knew Julian's combination. It was his own birthday. Inside, buried under a stack of bonds, was the prenuptial agreement he thought he had shredded years ago. I flipped to page 12. Clause 4. In the event of proven criminal activity or material dishonesty regarding joint business assets by one party, all assets revert to the other party. Got you, I whispered. I had one final technical preparation. I remotely accessed the lighting control system for the Zenith Tower's exterior LED mesh. It was designed to display abstract art patterns. I rewrote the script. I locked the new program behind a voice recognition key that only responded to my vocal frequency. That night, the house was empty. Julian was staying at a hotel near the site to prepare. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me had long, soft waves of hair that Julian loved because they made me look gentle. They made me look compliant. I picked up the fabric shears from the counter. I grabbed a handful of hair and closed the blades. The sound of the steel cutting through the strands was the most satisfying sound I had heard in years. Snip. Gold locks fell to the tiled floor. I kept cutting until my hair was a sharp, angled bob that framed my jawline like a helmet. I washed my face, scrubbing away the last traces of the submissive wife. The eyes that stared back were not gentle. They were cold, clear, and ready for war. Showtime. I said to the mirror. The grand opening of the Zenith Tower was less of a celebration and more of a coronation. The entire city of Viridia Bay had turned out to worship at the altar of glass and steel that Julian and Serafina had erected. Searchlights swept the night sky, cutting through the coastal fog, while a red carpet stretched from the curb to the massive brass doors like a bloody tongue waiting to swallow the guests whole. I walked the gauntlet of flashing cameras with my hand tucked into the crook of Julian's arm. He was playing the role of the doting husband to perfection, flashing his $1,000,000 smile at the paparazzi, but his fingers were digging into my bicep with bruising force, a silent warning to keep me upright and smiling. Inside, the lobby had been transformed into a palace of excess. Towers of champagne glasses reached toward the chandelier, and a scale model of the building made of solid gold sat on a velvet pedestal in the center of the room. The air smelled of expensive lilies and greed. Julian nodded to the mayor and the city council members, but his eyes were constantly darting toward the mezzanine level. There, standing on the VIP balcony like a queen surveying her subjects, was Serafina Cross. She held a glass of dark red wine, her eyes locking onto mine with a look of predatory amusement. She was enjoying this. She was enjoying watching the lamb walk itself to the slaughter. I scanned the press pit, looking for the one ally I had in this room. I spotted her near the back, wearing a press badge that identified her as a freelancer. Mom was blending in perfectly, her camera ready, her face a mask of professional detachment. But when our eyes met for a split second, I saw the fierce nod. She was ready. The FBI was ready. As we moved through the crowd, the whispers started. Serafina's PR team had done their job well. Heard, she completely lost it. A socialite whispered behind her fan. Institutionalized by the end of the week. A man muttered to his colleague. Sad. Really? Julian is a saint for standing by her. I kept my smile frozen in place, a porcelain mask that hid the rage boiling beneath my skin. We reached the foot of the stage, and the lights dimmed. A hush fell over the room. Julian leaned in close to my ear, his breath hot and smelling of scotch. Smile brighter. Elara, he hissed, his voice low and venomous. And remember to read the script exactly as I gave it to you. If you deviate by even one word. Well, your mother walks home alone tonight. It would be a shame if she had a nasty accident on those dark streets. My blood turned to ice, then instantly boiled into steam. Until that moment, a tiny, foolish part of me had hesitated. A part of me had remembered the man who used to bring me coffee in bed. But that man was dead. The monster standing next to me had just threatened the only person in the world who loved me. He had just signed his own death warrant. Don't worry. Julian, I whispered back, widening my smile until it felt like it would split my face. I will give a performance they will never forget. The spotlight hit the stage, blindingly white. Julian released my arm and bounded up the stairs, basking in the applause. He took the microphone, oozing charisma. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. Julian boomed, his voice echoing through the cavernous hall. Tonight is not just about a building. It is about a vision of a future where luxury meets sustainability, where we reach for the stars and actually touch them. The crowd roared with approval. He spoke for 10 minutes, using every buzzword in the book, painting himself as a titan of industry. I stood in the shadows of the wings, clutching the remote control in my sweaty palm. But no vision can become reality without the technical mind to ground it, Julian said, turning toward me with a fake look of adoration. Please welcome my wife, the chief architect of the Zenith Tower, Elara Vance. She has a few words to say before we cut the ribbon. He extended his hand, inviting me to join him in the light. He thought he was inviting me to my execution. He was wrong. He was handing me the axe. I walked up the stairs, the heels of my shoes clicking a rhythm of war on the stage floor. I took his hand, let him kiss my cheek, and stepped up to the podium. I looked out at the sea of faces, at the cameras broadcasting live to the world. I took a deep breath. Thank you, Julian, I said, my voice steady and clear. Yes, I have a few things to say. I stood alone in the center of the spotlight, the beam so bright it felt like an interrogation lamp. The audience of 500 wealthy investors, city officials, and reporters fell into a hushed silence, waiting for the tearful gratitude of a devoted wife. I looked out at the sea of expectant faces, then at the camera lenses that were broadcasting this moment to the entire state. When I was a student, I began, my voice soft and trembling just enough to draw them in. I dreamed of building sanctuaries. I believed that an architect's highest calling was to create safety in a chaotic world. I paused, letting the sentiment hang in the air like perfume. I saw Julian nod encouragingly from the side of the stage, thinking I was sticking to his script. I hardened my expression, shifting my stance from submissive to solid. But I learned recently that safety is not a commodity that is sold by the Thorn Group, I said, my voice dropping an octave, cutting through the room like a cold wind. In fact, safety was the first thing they sold off to pay for their lifestyle. Julian's smile faltered. He took a half step forward. I pressed the hidden sequence on the remote control in my hand. The massive LED screen behind me, which had been displaying a looping video of a golden sunset, blinked out, In its place, raw, ugly CAD drawings appeared. They were the structural blueprints of the Zenith Tower, but they were covered in angry red blotches. What you are seeing are the stress test simulations for the building you are currently standing in, I announced, my voice booming. These red zones represent catastrophic structural failure points. They exist because the grade A steel listed in the budget was swapped for cheap, brittle substitutes. A collective gasp ripped through the room. It sounded like all the oxygen had been sucked out at once. "Cut the mic!" Julian screamed, lunging toward me. "She is having a breakdown. Get her off the stage." He sprinted across the platform, his face twisted in a feral snarl. He was 10 feet away, then 5. I didn't flinch. I tapped the spacebar twice. Clang! The emergency fire shutters, which I had hacked into the system earlier that day, slammed down from the ceiling of the proscenium arch. They crashed into the stage floor inches in front of Julian's nose, separating me from him with a wall of solid steel. He banged his fists against the metal, shouting muffled threats that no one could hear over the rising panic of the crowd. "He can't stop the truth," I said calmly into the microphone. "And neither can she." I pointed the remote at the screen again. The blueprints vanished, replaced by an audio waveform. "Play," I commanded. The speakers crackled, and then a voice filled the hall. It was crystal clear. "Who cares about the seismic rating? Just pay the inspector $50,000 and pour the concrete. By the time it cracks, we will be in Monaco." It was Julian's voice. Arrogant, bored. Then came Serafina's distinctive, husky laugh. "You are wicked, darling." "I love it. Just make sure the wife signs off on it. We need a fall guy." The room erupted. People were standing up, knocking over chairs. Serafina was screaming from the VIP balcony, her face contorted with rage. "Turn it off!" she shrieked, pointing at the sound booth. "I order you to cut the feed. This is slander." "You can cut the screen." "Serafina," I said, looking up at her, my eyes locking onto hers. "But you cannot hide the building itself." I brought the microphone closer to my lips and spoke the activation code I had programmed. System override. Protocol truth. Outside, a roar went up from the crowds gathered on the street. Through the glass walls of the lobby, the guests could see the reflection of the tower in the bay. The exterior, usually lit in soft, elegant gold, had erupted into harsh, blinking red neon. The LED mesh that wrapped the entire 50-story structure was now scrolling a single word, 300 feet high, over and over again. Fraud, fraud, fraud. I turned back to the main camera, looking directly into the lens. "My name is on the approvals," I said, holding up the forensic handwriting analysis report my mother had handed me before the show. "But I did not sign them. This is an expert analysis proving my digital signature was stolen and used to approve a death trap." I pulled the jagged chunk of concrete from my pocket and slammed it onto the podium. Dust flew into the air. "This is the foundation of your investment," I declared. "It is missing 40% of its density. I have an independent engineering report filed with the city as of 5 minutes ago. This building is not safe for occupancy. I am officially requesting an immediate evacuation of this block." The room descended into chaos. The flashing lights of the cameras were blinding, a strobe light of judgment. Julian was trapped behind the barrier, pounding uselessly. Serafina stood frozen on the balcony, clutching the railing as her investors turned to look at her with eyes full of hatred. They were naked in the spotlight, stripped of every lie, every dollar, and every defense. I stood in the center of the storm, silent and unmoving. I had set the world on fire, and for the first time in years, I did not feel the heat. I felt cold, clean, and absolutely victorious. The echo of my voice had barely faded when the wail of sirens pierced the air, a cacophony of justice that drowned out the confused murmurs of the crowd. It was perfect timing. Mom had orchestrated the arrival of the authorities with the precision of a conductor leading a symphony. Through the towering glass walls of the lobby, blue and red strobe lights washed over the terrified guests, painting their faces in the colors of emergency. The doors burst open, but it was not guests leaving. It was a tidal wave of tactical gear and windbreakers emblazoned with 3 yellow letters FBI. I stepped back from the podium as agents swarmed the stage. Julian, who had been pounding on the steel shutter moments ago, spun around, his face drained of all color. He looked frantic, his eyes darting around for an escape route that did not exist. As the first agent grabbed his arm, Julian's composure shattered completely. "It was her," Julian screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me through the gap in the barrier. "She is insane! She hacked the system. I didn't know anything about the steal. It was all Vance. She is trying to frame me." Julian Thorne. "You are under arrest," the agent shouted over him, spinning him around and slamming his chest against the very podium he had used to preach his lies. The metallic click of handcuffs was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. On the balcony, Serafina realized the game was over. She hiked up her crimson gown and sprinted toward the VIP exit, shoving a waiter aside. She reached the door, expecting her private security team to whisk her away to a waiting helicopter. Instead, she found a wall of black uniforms blocking her path. It was the head of security, the same man I had heard in the basement discussing my murder. But I had sent him the audio file an hour before the ceremony with a note: "Turn on them, and you get immunity. Stick with them, and you go down for conspiracy to commit murder." He had made his choice. "Move!" Serafina shrieked, clawing at his chest. "Do you know who I am? I pay your salary card reader is broken." "Ma'am," the guard said, his face impassive. He didn't move an inch. "Looks like you are stuck here with the rest of us." 2 federal agents reached the balcony and took her arms. She kicked and screamed, spitting venomous curses, stripping away the last veneer of the elegant CEO to reveal the cornered animal underneath. "Serafina Cross," an agent announced, his voice carrying over the din. "You are under arrest for securities fraud, grand larceny, forgery, and conspiracy to endanger public safety." I stood alone on the upper platform, watching the chaos unfold below. I expected to feel joy. I expected to feel a rush of triumph. Instead, I felt a profound, quiet emptiness. It was a clean feeling, like a room that had been stripped of cluttered furniture, ready to be decorated anew. The empire of glass and lies was collapsing at my feet, and I was the only thing left standing solid. The guests, the cream of Viridia Bay society, were scrambling for the exits, covering their faces to hide from the news cameras. As they hurried past the stage, not a single one of them dared to look up at me. The woman they had whispered about, the woman they had pitied and mocked, was now the judge holding the gavel. They were terrified of my gaze. "Ilara." The scream tore through the noise. They were dragging Julian down the stairs. He twisted his body, fighting the agents, his eyes locking onto mine. He looked desperate, pathetic, a shadow of the man who had controlled my life for 5 years. "Ilara, baby, please," he begged, tears streaming down his face. "Tell them it is a mistake. We can fix this. I love you. Don't let them take me." I looked at him one last time. I saw the fear, but I knew it wasn't fear of losing me. It was fear of the consequences he had spent his life avoiding. I didn't say a word. I didn't smile. I simply turned my back on him and walked toward the wings of the stage. It was the exact opposite of the walk I had made into my house the night I found out. Then, I had walked into hell to find the truth. Now, I was walking out of it. In the shadows of the backstage area, Mom was waiting. She had put her camera away. Her eyes were shining. We didn't need a speech. We didn't need to analyze the victory. She opened her arms, and I stepped into them, burying my face in the wool of her sweater. We stood there for a long minute, holding each other up while the world outside burned down. "It is done," she whispered into my hair. We walked out the rear exit to where a black SUV was waiting. A stern-faced agent stepped forward. "Mrs. Vance," he asked. "Ms. Vance," I corrected him. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a small, encrypted hard drive. It contained the original CAD files, the bank transfers, the audio recordings, everything. "Here's the evidence," I said, placing the cool metal into his hand. "I am ready to make my statement." My phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. The headlines were already live. "Breaking Genius Architect Exposes Century's Fraud. Thorn Group Toppled in Shocking Whistleblower Event." I turned off the phone and climbed into the car. The air smelled of rain and sea salt, fresh and real. The nightmare was over. Morning was coming. 6 months later, the light in my new office felt different. It was not filtered through tinted, bulletproof glass or reflected off marble floors. It poured in through large, open windows, warm and unfiltered, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air of my small studio in the Arts District. It smelled of coffee and cedar, not expensive perfume and deception. I picked up the morning paper. The headline had finally shifted from the scandal to the sentencing. Julian had been given 20 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. The judge called him a merchant of catastrophe. They seized everything: the cars, the boats, the accounts in the Caymans. He went in a billionaire and came out a pauper in a jumpsuit. Serafina fared slightly better, but at a cost that destroyed her soul. She could not handle the prospect of 15 years in a cell. So she sang. She gave up names. She exposed a network of bribery that took down 3 state senators and a dozen city inspectors. She saved herself 5 years of prison time, but she ensured she would never walk into a boardroom again without being spat upon. I walked to the window and looked toward the skyline. The Zenith Tower was still there, but it looked like a patient in surgery. Cranes surrounded it, dismantling the top 10 floors to lower the center of gravity while crews reinforced the skeleton with the steel I had originally specified. It stood as a scar on the city, a 50-story reminder of what happens when greed tries to outsmart gravity. I turned back to my desk. I had walked away from the settlement with nothing. I refused the spousal support. I refused the shares. I only kept one thing: the diamond engagement ring Julian had given me to buy my silence. I sold it to a jeweler downtown and used the cash to rent this studio and buy my drafting table. "It is honest money now," I had told the jeweler. The door chimed, and Mom walked in. She looked 10 years younger. She placed a hardcover book on my desk. The cover featured a black and white photo of the unfinished Zenith Tower. The title read, "House of Cards, The Thorn Deception." It was already on the bestseller list for the 3rd week in a row. "The publisher wants a sequel," Mom said, grinning mischievously. "I told them I am retired. Again." "You love the attention," I teased, pouring her a cup of tea. "I love the truth," she corrected me. "And I love that my daughter got her name back." I looked at the brass nameplate on my desk. Ilara Vance, Principal Architect. No Thorn, just me. "Oh, before I forget," Mom said, reaching into her bag. "The mayor's office sent this over by courier. They didn't want to email it." I opened the thick envelope. It was a contract. The city was forming a new independent oversight committee for urban planning, and they wanted me to lead it. They were offering me full autonomy. No more corners cut, no more whispers in the back room. "They want me to redesign the waterfront," I said, scanning the document. "The whole thing." "Well," Mom said, sipping her tea, "you better get to work." That evening, I took the long way home. I drove my old sedan along the coast road, winding past the cliffs where the grand estates sat. I slowed down as I passed the plot of land where the glass mansion had stood. The bank had foreclosed on it immediately, and the new developers had razed it to the ground, claiming the bad juju made it unsellable. It was just an empty lot now, overgrown with wild coastal grass. I rolled down the window. The smell of the ocean hit me, briny and cold. It used to smell like isolation. Now, it smelled like salt and infinite possibility. I smiled, a genuine, easy smile that reached my eyes. I was broke compared to who I was 6 months ago, but I had never felt richer. I returned to the studio and spread a fresh sheet of vellum across my drafting table. The paper was clean, white, and waiting. I picked up my pencil, feeling the familiar weight of the wood and graphite. The room was silent, but it was a peaceful silence, not the heavy, suffocating quiet of a house full of secrets. There were no more whispers behind my back. There was only the sound of the ocean outside and the scratch of my pencil creating a new foundation. One line at a time. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please comment below and let me know where you are tuning in from. I would love to hear your thoughts and connect with you all. Don't forget to subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button so this story can reach even more people.